Please, take a deep breath, lean back, and gently close your eyes for a moment. Try to remember a very specific sound from your childhood. Perhaps it is the deafening, rhythmic song of the cicadas on a sweltering July afternoon, or the sharp honk of the roving greengrocer winding his way through the narrow streets of your old neighborhood. Can you smell the rich, earthy aroma of authentic Greek coffee roasting over hot sand? Today, we are taking a gentle journey back to the Greece of the 1970s and 1980s. We are going to explore 20 forgotten details of daily life that have quietly vanished from our modern world. These are not just memories of old objects, they are the fragments of our youth, the beautifully simple rituals that shaped our hearts. I promise you, the very last memory we will discuss today is the most touching of all, because it is the one thing that truly defined the soul of our magnificent lost neighborhoods. Let us walk down memory lane together. Before we begin our countdown, we must take a moment to understand how differently time used to flow back then. In those decades, time was not something we constantly chased. It was something we fully inhabited. The days felt wonderfully long, stretching out lazily under the golden Mediterranean sun. We had to wait for almost everything, whether it was waiting for a letter to arrive, waiting for our favorite song to play on the radio, or waiting for a neighbor to pass by just to hear the local news. But that waiting was never empty. It was filled with anticipation, with daydreaming, and with a profound sense of presence. People often say that life without modern technology was poorer, but if you lived through those years, you know the exact opposite is true. Our lives were infinitely richer in sincerity, in direct human connection, and in emotional depth. We did not have screens to hide behind. We had each other, we had our community, and we had a beautiful simplicity that made every single interaction feel completely meaningful. Let us begin our journey by stepping into the smoky, lively atmosphere of the traditional neighborhood coffee house. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear the sharp, rhythmic clack of backgammon pieces hitting the wooden board. This was not just a place to drink a beverage, it was the true parliament of the common man. The air was always thick with the rich, earthy aroma of authentic Greek coffee, fully brewing in a traditional brass pot, nestled deeply in hot, golden sand. You would watch the owner carefully moving the pot in small, deliberate circles, until the dark liquid foamed perfectly at the very top. The older men of the neighborhood would sit there for countless hours, on those uncomfortable woven wooden chairs, arguing passionately about politics, football, or the daily news. Their voices would rise and fall in a theatrical display of emotion, yet it always ended in joyous laughter and another round of drinks. You could hear the clicking of worry beads moving rhythmically through their weathered fingers, marking the slow, unhurried passage of time. There was a profound sense of belonging within those walls. No one was ever truly in a rush to leave, because that simple cup of coffee was an invitation to connect and simply be present. Now let us remember the sacred Sunday morning ritual of the neighborhood wood-fired oven. Long before every kitchen was equipped with a modern electric stove, Sunday lunch was a glorious communal affair. Do you remember waking up to the smell of garlic, oregano and lemon as your mother prepared the roasting pan? It was usually a large buttered aluminum tray filled with a leg of lamb or a chicken, surrounded by deeply seasoned potatoes. Your job was to carefully carry this heavy tray down the street to the local baker. The pavement was filled with families doing the exact same thing, turning the neighborhood into a parade of wonderful aromas. The baker would take your tray, slide it into the massive cavernous depths of his glowing wood-fired oven, and give you a little numbered metal token. A few hours later, you would walk back to collect your meal. Carrying that steaming, sizzling tray back home, using thick kitchen towels to protect your hands from the burning metal, was a true test of patience. The smell wafting up to your nose was absolutely intoxicating. That shared oven baked the community together, creating a Sunday flavor that no modern appliance will ever be able to replicate. Let us turn our minds to the quintessential center of every Greek neighborhood, the local street kiosk. Do you remember the feeling of walking up to that brightly lit yellow booth on the corner of the sidewalk? It was not just a place to buy things, it was the beating heart of our community. The kiosk owner, usually an older man with a gentle smile, sat inside, surrounded by a colorful chaos of hanging magazines and daily newspapers. But the most important feature in the 1980s was the heavy rotary telephone sitting firmly on his counter. Before everyone had a phone in their home, this was our lifeline to the rest of the world. You would wait patiently in line, holding those heavy silver coins in your palm, feeling the cold metal against your skin. When it was your turn, you carefully inserted the coin and listened to the mechanical clinking sound as it dropped into the metal box. Then came the rhythmic, heavy spinning of the dial as you called a loved one. The owner would discreetly look away, pretending not to hear, though he probably knew the secrets of the entire street. The kiosk was a glowing beacon in the evening, a place where neighbors exchanged warm greetings and felt completely connected. Do you recall the crisp, distinctive rustle of the traditional blue school uniforms? Until they were officially abolished in the early 1980s, every morning began with a ritual of putting on that deep blue garment, with a stiff, bright white collar. For the girls, it was an apron-like dress. For the boys, it was a tailored shirt or jacket. Mothers would spend their Sunday evenings meticulously washing, starching, and ironing those white collars to absolute perfection. When you walked into the schoolyard, there was a beautiful sea of matching blue. While some people saw it as a restriction, looking back, there was a deep sense of equality and unity woven into that fabric. It did not matter if your family was wealthy or struggling. In that blue uniform, every child stood on equal ground. You could hear the collective rustle of the stiff fabric as hundreds of children lined up for the morning prayer under the bright morning sun. The pockets were always filled with small treasures like marbles, folded paper notes, or half-eaten pieces of sesame candy. Taking off that uniform at the end of the day signaled the official start of our precious childhood freedom. One of the most magical experiences of a Greek summer was an evening spent at the open-air cinema. As the fierce afternoon heat finally gave way to a gentle, cooling breeze, the neighborhood would slowly gather under the stars. The entrance was always marked by a handwritten movie poster and the overwhelming sweet scent of night-blooming jasmine and honeysuckle wrapping around the outer walls. Do you remember the incredibly distinct crunch of the white gravel beneath your shoes as you walked down the aisles to find a canvas director's chair? There was a specific soundscape to these evenings. It was the whirring of the heavy film projector coming from the back booth, mixed with the collective sound of dozens of people cracking roasted pumpkin seeds between their teeth. When the film reel needed to be changed, the screen would go dark, the dim sidelights would turn on, and the magical intermission would begin. The smell of grilling souvlaki from the small canteen would waft over the audience. In those brief moments you would lean back, look up past the glowing screen, and simply watch the stars shining in the dark, velvet summer sky. It was an atmosphere of pure, cinematic romance. Let us think back to the joyful, chaotic symphony of children playing freely in the streets until the sun went down. The asphalt was our playground, our kingdom, and our canvas. We would take thick pieces of white chalk and draw elaborate squares for hopscotch right in the middle of the road. Cars were so few and far between that a simple shout of warning was enough to pause the game for a moment. Do you remember the thrill of playing hide and seek, pressing your back against a warm brick wall, trying to silence your own heavy breathing? Our knees were constantly scraped, covered in dust and painted with the red stain of iodine, worn like proud badges of honor. The air was filled with the echoing sounds of bouncing rubber balls and the joyous, unrestrained laughter of neighborhood friends. But the most iconic sound of all came exactly at dusk. It was the chorus of mothers stepping out onto their balconies, one by one, calling out their children's names to tell them that dinner was ready. You would beg for just 5 more minutes, reluctant to leave the magic of the street, knowing you would return to the exact same spot the very next afternoon. We must not forget the absolute sacred silence of the afternoon siesta during the scorching summer months. Between the hours of 3 and 5 in the afternoon, the entire country collectively pressed the pause button. The wooden shutters of every apartment and house were tightly closed, transforming the blinding white-hot streets into shaded, cool sanctuaries. The striped canvas awnings were lowered over the balconies, blocking out the fierce Mediterranean sun. If you were a child, you were strictly forbidden from making any noise. You had to lie in your bed in the semi-darkness, staring at the dust motes dancing in the single ray of light that managed to pierce through the shutters. The silence was so profound that you could clearly hear the rhythmic, hypnotic ticking of the wall clock in the hallway, or the isolated, solitary buzz of a single cicada singing from a distant pine tree. It was a time of forced rest, a daily reset for the mind and the body. We hated it as children because it interrupted our play, but looking back now, that mandatory period of absolute quiet was a beautiful, restorative ritual that respected the harsh, demanding rhythm of the natural climate. Can you still hear the crackling, distorted voice of the roving neighborhood vendor echoing through the concrete canyons of the city? Long before massive supermarkets dominated our lives, the market came directly to our doorsteps. You would hear the heavy rumble of an old, battered pickup truck slowly turning the corner, followed by the vendor's booming voice, shouting his wares through a metal megaphone. Sometimes he was selling massive, dark green watermelons from the village. Other times it was sacks of earthy potatoes or fresh, fragrant garlic. Hearing that voice was a signal for all the housewives to step out onto their balconies, leaning over the railings to inspect the goods below. Baskets attached to long ropes would be slowly lowered down from the third or fourth floors, containing a few colourful banknotes and a handwritten list. The vendor would expertly weigh the produce on his hanging metal scale, shouting friendly banter and local gossip up to the balconies. It was a vibrant, noisy, and deeply personal way of shopping. The smell of the fresh earth clinging to the vegetables lingered in the street long after the loud, rattling truck had slowly driven away. Let us revisit the incredible dedication it took to simply listen to our favorite music. In the era of cassette tapes and radio, music was not instantly available at the push of a digital button. It was a treasure we had to hunt for. Do you remember sitting on the floor next to your clunky stereo system, holding your breath, with your finger hovering anxiously over the record and play buttons? You were waiting for the radio host to finally play that one pop or folk song you desperately wanted. The sheer tension of hoping the DJ would not talk over the beautiful intro or the fading outro was immense. When the song finally started, you pressed the buttons with a satisfying, heavy, mechanical click. And then there was the inevitable moment when the tape would suddenly get tangled. We all knew the delicate surgical procedure of using a simple plastic pen, inserting it into the jagged wheel of the cassette, and slowly, carefully, rewinding the delicate brown ribbon back into place. Creating a mixtape for someone was an act of profound patience and true devotion. We held those plastic rectangular blocks in our hands, knowing they contained hours of our dedicated time and our deepest, unspoken emotions. Do you remember the intimate, dusty atmosphere of the neighborhood seamstress's workshop? Before the era of fast fashion and mass-produced clothing, having a garment made was a deeply personal, sensory experience. You would walk into her small room, usually a converted spare bedroom in her apartment, and immediately hear the rapid, rhythmic hum of the heavy, black sewing machine. The floor was always covered in colorful, frayed scraps of discarded fabric and tiny, shimmering spools of thread. The seamstress would greet you with a warm smile, often speaking with small metal pins held precariously between her lips. The ritual of measuring was a delicate dance. The cold, yellow measuring tape wrapping around your shoulders, the soft chalk drawing ghostly white lines directly onto the stiff, new fabric. We would go to the local market for days just to select the perfect cloth for a special Easter dress or a winter coat, feeling the textures of wool, cotton and velvet against our fingertips. Wearing clothes made specifically for your body, stitched by a woman who watched you grow up, made every garment feel like a heavy, protective embrace from the community itself. We must talk about the sheer patience required to communicate through the state telephone company in those days. Getting a landline installed in your home was not a matter of days. It often took several long, frustrating years of waiting on endless government lists. When that glorious day finally arrived, the heavy plastic telephone was placed in the center of the living room like a sacred altar. But the most memorable part of this era was the party line, where two different households shared the exact same telephone connection. If you picked up the heavy receiver to make a call, you might suddenly hear the unmistakable sound of your neighbor breathing or catch the middle of their deeply personal conversation. You had to politely clear your throat or gently hang up and wait your turn. Next to the phone always sat a small, incredibly worn alphabetical notebook filled with the handwritten phone numbers of every friend and relative. Dialing a number was a physical act. You pulled the heavy rotary dial all the way to the right and let it spin back with a rhythmic, whirring sound. Every call was deliberate, expensive, and genuinely meaningful. Let us take a moment to remember the physical weight and the distinct texture of our old currency, the drachma. Money back then felt substantial in your hands. Do you remember the deep, satisfying jingle of those heavy, beautifully engraved silver and copper coins bouncing in your pocket? There was the large, magnificent 50 drachma coin, featuring the face of Homer, and the colorful, intricate paper bills that smelled of ink and countless human hands. With just a few of those heavy coins, a child could experience absolute bliss. You would run to the corner bakery, trade a shiny coin, and receive a steaming hot cheese pie in return. The baker would hand it to you wrapped in a thin piece of paper that instantly became translucent from the warm, melted butter and oil. You would count your change carefully, feeling the deeply ridged edges of the coins against your thumb. The drachma was not just a means of exchange. It was the tangible weight of our daily labor, our small childhood allowances, and the specific metallic scent of an era that vanished overnight into the sleek, weightless, digital transactions of the modern age. Think back to the kitchen drawers of your childhood and the absolute treasure they contained. The handwritten family recipe notebooks. These were not pristine, glossy cookbooks bought from a store. They were small, incredibly fragile notebooks, bound in worn cardboard, and filled with the elegant slanting cursive handwriting of our mothers and grandmothers. Every single page told a story of Sunday dinners and holiday feasts. The paper was often beautifully damaged, bearing the permanent translucent stains of spilled olive oil, dried drops of red wine, and the dusting of fine baking flour. When you opened the book, it smelled faintly of cinnamon, vanilla, and the passage of time. There were no precise scientific measurements. Recipes called for a teacup of sugar, a wine glass of oil, or simply flour until the dough feels right in your hands. Passing down this notebook was like passing down the very soul of the family. Touching those pages today, tracing the faded blue ink with your fingers, brings back the roaring sound of the kitchen extractor fan, the heat of the oven, and the comforting, protective presence of the women who nourished us. Do you remember the chaotic, joyful energy of a traditional summer village festival? These gatherings were the ultimate celebration of community life, completely stripped of modern pretension. The entire village square would be transformed. Long, heavy wooden tables were pushed together and covered in simple white paper tablecloths that rustled loudly in the warm evening breeze. The air was absolutely thick with the dense, intoxicating smoke of roasting lamb and pork turning slowly over open charcoal pits. But the true heart of the festival was the piercing, soulful wail of the traditional clarinet echoing off the stone walls of the houses. When the music started, everything else faded away. Hundreds of people, from small toddlers to incredibly fragile grandparents, would link hands to form a massive, winding circle. You could feel the rough, calloused hands of your neighbors gripping yours tightly. The dust would rise from the dry earth beneath their stamping feet, mixing with the sweat and the sheer, unbridled joy of the moment. We did not dance for an audience. We danced for ourselves, united in a shared rhythm that flowed directly through our shared blood. Let us recall the delicate, emotional ritual of sending and receiving physical mail, especially the iconic blue aerograms. In an era when international phone calls were prohibitively expensive, these thin, pale blue sheets of paper were our only connection to relatives working hard in factories in Germany or building new lives in America and Australia. You would fold the paper carefully along the printed lines, creating its own lightweight envelope. Because space was so limited, every single word was chosen with immense care, written in tiny, cramped letters to fit all the family news into one page. The absolute joy of hearing the postman's sharp whistle in the neighborhood was unmatched. You would run to the metal mailbox, hoping to see those vibrant foreign stamps. When a letter arrived, it was not read silently. The whole family would gather in the living room, and the letter would be read aloud, bringing tears and laughter to the room. The paper itself felt incredibly precious, having traveled thousands of miles across oceans and borders, carrying the physical touch and the lingering scent of the people we missed so desperately. Think back to the collective experience of watching the national television broadcasts. Before we had hundreds of channels and streaming services, we had exactly 2 state-run stations. Television was not a constant background noise. It was a highly anticipated daily event. Do you remember staring at the colorful test pattern on the screen, accompanied by a high-pitched continuous tone, just waiting for the broadcast to officially begin? When the picture was fuzzy, someone had to stand near the television and delicately adjust the indoor rabbit ear antennas, twisting the metal rods until the heavy static magically cleared. At 8 o'clock in the evening, the iconic, dramatic music of the national news would begin, and the entire family would fall dead silent, gathered together on the heavy floral sofa. If a classic Greek comedy was playing on a Saturday night, you could literally walk down the street and hear the exact same dialogue echoing from every single open window in the neighborhood. We all watched the exact same things at the exact same time, giving us a beautiful, shared cultural vocabulary that united the entire country. Do you remember the exhausting but joyous springtime ritual of washing the heavy winter carpets? As May approached and the weather turned reliably warm, the entire neighborhood embarked on a massive cleaning operation. Massive, heavy wool rugs were dragged out of the living rooms and rolled out onto large balconies or directly into the cement courtyards. The garden hose would be turned on, flooding the intricate woven patterns with cold, sparkling water. The smell of harsh, traditional green soap mixed with the dusty scent of wet wool was instantly recognizable. We would take off our shoes, roll up our trousers, and walk barefoot on the soaking carpets, scrubbing vigorously with stiff, wooden-handled brooms. The water would run brown at first, then slowly clear, cascading down the balcony drains. It was incredibly hard physical labor, but it was accompanied by shouting, laughter, and splashing water across the fence with the neighbors. When the rugs were finally draped over the railings to dry in the blazing sun, the house felt suddenly light, echoing, and wonderfully prepared for the long, hot summer months ahead. Let us savor the memory of tasting traditional, authentic yogurt set in small, rustic clay pots. Today, we casually peel back the plastic lid of a highly processed snack, but back then, eating yogurt was a completely different sensory experience. You would buy it fresh from the dairy shop or the roaming milkman. The clay pot felt incredibly cool, heavy, and delightfully rough against the palms of your hands. The top was covered with a thin piece of tightly pulled tin foil. When you punctured that foil with your spoon, you were met with a thick, beautifully wrinkled layer of yellow cream, the famous crust that we all either fiercely fought over or carefully pushed aside. The yogurt underneath was incredibly dense, rich, and possessed a sharp, acidic tang that instantly woke up your taste buds. As you ate, your metal spoon would scrape against the unglazed terracotta bottom, producing a distinct scratching sound. It was often served simply, perhaps with a generous spoonful of dark thyme honey or a piece of heavy, crusty bread. That humble clay pot held the pure, unadulterated taste of the Greek countryside. We must journey to the ultimate sanctuary of our childhood, the grandparents' house in the village. Walking through that heavy wooden door was like stepping out of time entirely. The first thing that hit you was the complex, comforting smell. It was a beautiful blend of burning wood from the cast iron stove, dried lavender, and the faint, sharp scent of mothballs protecting the winter blankets. Every flat surface in the living room, from the top of the bulky television set to the wooden arms of the chairs, was meticulously covered by intricate, hand-crocheted white doilies. On the wall, the heavy pendulum clock ticked away the seconds with a loud, rhythmic heartbeat that lulled you to sleep at night. There was an overwhelming feeling of complete safety in those rooms. Your grandmother would instantly rush to the kitchen to bring you a crystal glass of cold water and a small plate with a spoonful of sweet cherry preserve. In that house, surrounded by faded black and white photographs of ancestors you never met, you knew you were deeply, unconditionally loved. It was a place where the chaotic modern world simply could not reach you. Finally, we arrive at the most profound and beautiful ritual of all, the one detail that truly defined the soul of the 1970s and 80s, the permanently unlocked front doors. It sounds absolutely absurd and even dangerous today, but back then, turning the key in the lock was an afterthought. During the day, the heavy wooden doors of our homes were left wide open, with only a thin screen door pulled shut to keep the summer flies away. The key was often left carelessly in the outer lock or hidden under a highly visible flower pot. Neighbors did not call ahead to announce their visits. They simply walked up to the screen door, called out your mother's name, and walked right into the kitchen. People would casually borrow a cup of sugar, a lemon, or simply drop in to share a quick cup of coffee and a laugh. There was a profound, unspoken trust that wove the entire street together into one large, protective family. We did not live in fortresses built of fear and isolation. We lived in open, breathing homes that welcomed the world inside. That open door is the ultimate symbol of the innocence and the immense, beautiful trust we have tragically lost. When we look back at these 20 forgotten details, it becomes incredibly clear that we are not simply mourning the loss of old objects or outdated technology. What we truly miss is who we were back then. We miss the feeling of time stretching out before us, the deep, unfiltered connection with our neighbors, and the beautiful innocence of our youth. The world has undoubtedly moved forward, becoming faster, shinier, and more convenient. But sometimes, in the quietest moments of the night, we would trade all of this modern convenience just to hear the sound of the neighborhood children playing in the street one more time. If this journey back in time brought a tear to your eye or a warm smile to your face, please consider subscribing to our channel and leaving a like on this video to help us keep these precious memories alive. But most importantly, I want to hear from you. Which of these beautiful forgotten rituals do you miss the very most? What is your fondest memory from growing up in those golden decades? Please share your personal stories in the comments below and let us remember the beautiful days of our past together.